Yes, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. So we are from the Swiss Polar Institute, and we finance also fieldwork and facilitate access to fieldwork for scientific research. We also hope to help ECRs with practical skills in the field, and this fits well with today's topic, which is about planning successful field campaigns. So we are aware that there is not one magical solution for fieldwork. Every fieldwork is unique, depending on site location and nature of science. But we hope to bring people with different expertise to depict a mosaic of experiences of fieldwork and to have good conversation about how good planning can look like. Yes. So there will be 4 presentations about managing networks in Switzerland and abroad, and also about integrating uncertainty in fieldwork and navigating customs. And then we will have a panel discussion with more extended conversation about how to plan good fieldwork. Yeah, and also in the end, there will be a small aperitif next to the room. Yeah, and I leave the floor to Basil, who will give the first presentation. Oh. Like this.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. All right, thank you. As you can see, we're very practical people, and that's what that little event is for. So as you probably noticed, I'm also from the Swiss Polar Institute, and actually we really wanted to make this event a place for different people with different horizons to provide inputs. But we still thought that this would be a great opportunity to just give a few pieces of advice that we have gathered at the Institute over the years. And yeah, it's probably not the most interesting part of this event, but we will keep it short. So yeah, bear with me, please, for a few minutes. So I've called that input connecting or managing networks in Switzerland. And of course, doing fieldwork is important abroad. You need to have good local partners, everything, but it's also good or helpful to have a few things planned in Switzerland before you start your field trip. And the first thing I would like to underline here is, well, basically the connections within your institution and maybe in particular your finance department, because usually funders will give you the grant or the funding for your fieldwork on an institutional account. So depending on the type or the design of your research project, you really need to foresee that you probably will have to access funding. So, I mean, we understand that this is probably trivial to most of you, but we've experienced it in the past that people contacted us in the field telling us that basically their lack of access to financial resources made it difficult for them to carry out successfully their project. So this requires that you reach out to the right people within your home institution and that you coordinate accordingly. A second aspect that we think is important is that you foresee cash flow or manage cash flow through the lifetime of your project, and that requires that basically, again, you reach out to your administration. And to my knowledge, all Swiss research institutions have a system in place to overcome cash flow issues, but just understand that funders do not care about your internal timelines, your deadlines do not match with theirs. What they often are is foreseeable because they do calls and things like that every year, but they don't care about the timelines within your project. So again, reach out to your institution to find solutions to overcome these issues. Yeah, insurances are important when you carry out fieldwork. You probably know that, but there are a few things to consider when you prepare for a field trip. First, you should know that most or all institutions have an insurance packages for their employees, so you're covered, but this varies greatly from one place to another. So in larger institutions like ETH, you're probably in a privileged position. Smaller research institutions have less support usually. So it starts with really trying to figure out what what kind of support you benefit from within your institution. And then you have to complement. And that's a bit a painful process because you need to dig in, read the small little things that are usually read by no one in the insurances, but it could really become very relevant. So I've just prepared a few bullets here, but please, this is by no means a checklist because I mean, I think, and that's maybe also the first thing to understand, there's no one size fits all project. I know you work in very different settings, so the issues are also very different. And as such, again, you really need to dig a little bit into that. Most universities also have contact people who will hopefully be able to help you. But I think one important thing to consider is that obviously you need to have medical coverage in the countries you are working, but also where you're likely to receive treatment. And these are not necessarily the same, right? I mean, depending where you work, you might be brought to a place with more infrastructure, especially in remote places, or be it in remote high altitude regions or polar regions. Also, if you do shipborne research, you might not necessarily know where, in case of a medevac, you would be brought to. So that's requiring a little bit of anticipation. One thing is also to really focus on the limitation, the geographic coverage of your insurance. And I'm not sure many of you will go above 80° north or south, but many insurances have that limitation in place. Then you also want to ensure that basically you have a repatriation or medevac coverage. So some of these insurer will also help you organize the medevac, but it's important to understand that money isn't everything because obviously the logistics needs to be in place. Is that something probably easy to organize if you work in the Swiss Alps or in Paris or something like that, but if you work in polar regions, that's not always a given. Often the medevac coverage starts actually from an international airport, which obviously in a very remote area can be an issue. So that also needs to be accounted for. And again, yeah, money isn't everything because you need to have logistics in place to carry it out. That's quite obvious. And then maybe the last point, but that's just a little invitation to you. If you do fieldwork in polar region, I highly recommend you reach out to the communication department of your institution because I think fieldwork always makes for a good story. Combining scientific messages with anecdotes from the field and powerful images is something that works well. And I'm confident that the communication officers at your institution will thank you for taking the time. You need to be aware that it takes a little bit of time. I'm sure you are. So you should be a little bit committed, but I think it's really a worthwhile investment. All right. Yeah, now to the second point, which is also, I think, important because you will require resources to carry out your fieldwork, is how to connect with funders. And here, obviously, again, every funder is a bit different. And what I will tell you is a bit based on my experience within the Swiss Polar Institute, but I think much of what I will say is applicable to other institutions that proceed through bottom-up processes. Their evaluation process and mechanisms are likely rather comparable. This is not applicable maybe to smaller funders or private funders and donors or things like that, because I think their mechanisms are much more random. So maybe the first and the most important message is when you write the proposal is to ask yourself whether the proposal fits in the call. And again, this may sound obvious, but our experience shows that it's not always the case. So really ask yourself, is my proposal answering to the aims that are explicitly or implicitly connected to the call? So what I call here the spirit of the call. And this is important because founders want to achieve goals that they don't always state in their calls, but that might go beyond a strict focus on scientific excellence. I mean, they might have other goals in mind, like structuring a community providing new opportunities to early career scientists, leveraging on opportunities, enhancing the success rates of applicants for larger proposals. So really ask yourself whether you answer to that. And if you're unsure, talk to the agency, because that can limit the risk of misunderstandings that are often problematic in this context. So, and then of course you need to write good proposals, which is absolutely not an easy task. I think we all know that, but again, based on my experience, I would just like to give a few pieces of advice here. I don't review proposals myself, but I'm often in charge of the process, so I have a bit an understanding of the discussion that arise. And I mean, my biggest advice is make it easy for the reviewer to review your proposal, or in another word, don't piss the reviewer that is supposed to review your proposal. And that's something that happens a lot. Just because you need to understand or put yourself in the position of the people who do these reviews. I mean, they do that often as an additional commitment to their already busy week, or and they get, I don't know, maybe 5-10 proposals to review. So really try to make it easy for them to review your proposal. And that involves, for instance, avoiding the use of technical jargon, because you cannot assume that every member of a panel is an expert in your field. So explain things, try to keep it simple, and don't assume. Also, don't try to impress the reviewers with complexity. That's not helpful. Think about the structure and try to ensure that your proposal is readable in one go, because if you have 10 proposals to read, you don't want to have to read the proposal 3 times to understand what you want to do. An important aspect is really be transparent also about the weaknesses of your proposal. For instance, if they don't match with a goal, or if they entail risks, or if they don't align exactly with the aim of the call. So don't try to confuse the panelists, rather address it. Because if, for instance, your proposal is risky, then if you address it, the reviewers will understand that you're aware of the risks and you're working towards mitigating these risks. If you pretend they're not here, you're just creating a confusion which usually doesn't help your case, I would say. Do not neglect practical aspects, which will be discussed later on more, because founders usually like proposals that are feasible. And then also be aware that the budgets are looked at carefully. So invest a little bit of time. It usually comes at the end of the drafting process. You might be tired. Make also sure it's really consistent with the proposal you're writing, because that's also really something that gets reviewed carefully. And now I will just share with you 4 slides that I have collected from other people who have worked as reviewers, have worked at the Swiss National Science Foundation, have also organized similar evaluations. And I've just asked them, I will keep it anonymous, so I don't want to share their names, but just ask them to give like 4 bullets about what you should do, or maybe also what you should not do in a proposal. So I will just share them with you right now and let you go through it. There's a little bit of repetition with what I have said and what they say, but it just gives you another perspective on it. Okay, if I go to the next one. Little comment from my side on the last bullet. Although funding rates usually stay the same, at least we will choose the best project and not the best proposal if they're all equal. So it's still a good thing, I think. Okay, so one last slide and then I will hand over to more exciting topics. There are training opportunities in Switzerland, and I think some are very generic or general, like, I don't know, lab safety or also proposal writing. Of course, they're often provided by your own institution, so do them if they help you. Some are more specialized. I know that, for instance, at the SLF in Davos, they provide good trainings on avalanche safety, things like that, that might really be relevant if you do in some areas where avalanches are an issue and maybe you also don't have the good avalanche forecast you benefit from like you have in Switzerland. At SPI, we also offer specialized training. So one is a health and safety training in remote regions. So it's kind of a wilderness first response training with also an insight into different mechanisms we have with other organizations to get access to telehealth, customized pharmacies, things like that. We do offer a training for glacier ice terra. It's an introduction training. It's fully booked for this year, unfortunately, but it's an annual training. I know some of you will participate in it, I think. We offer support on demand more because the demand is not so high for helicopter safety training if your research involves helicopter usage, because there are a few things that should be trained, be it shipborne or also just in other terrain involving slings, transport, things like that. Now we also have a workshop on social dynamics in the field that is planned. I think it's end of May, so there are still a few spots open if you're interested. It's about how having positive social dynamics in a group, but also a bit how can you avoid harassment situations and things like that in the field, which is I think a very topical issue at the moment. Yeah. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? I'll just use it this way because it's too big for me. Okay, so hello everyone, and I've been asked to give a presentation about networks abroad. So it looks like I have lots of networks. I was not aware about this, but Olaf asked me to talk about how I managed to build up the international and national networks. And as you see here, but everyone, of course, I'm going to talk about my own experience, but everyone needs to think about their own field work and how to translate it. So this is my experience, but please don't think that everyone needs to go on this ship, but everyone will need to find its own way of translating this into their own field work and networking. So, but this is an image of Polarstern. This is one of the icebreakers that we usually go to the Arctic Ocean to get samples. And of course, for this, we do need to have collaborations with people having this kind of infrastructures. So what we do in my group is actually this would be my slide summary of the science we do. We go to the ocean and we want to understand the distribution of certain pollutants in order to understand the pathways of waters as they flow from the Atlantic into the Arctic Ocean. So we precisely look into radioactive pollution that is being released to the ocean through the weapon test. So this would represent the weapon test. And actually, I have this. Yeah, so this would represent the weapon test. So this was like a global source of contamination to the ocean. But we do have in France and UK also 2 sources of radioactive contamination. And these point-like sources are very good to then follow the waters as they have been spiked with these tracers into the Arctic and North Atlantic. And with this, we understand where waters go, how long does it take for these waters to go from one place to the next, how do they mix, and in the end, also to understand a bit the role of the oceans in storing anthropogenic carbon. So as you can imagine, we need to go to the ocean, especially to the Arctic and the North Atlantic. And so that's been basically what we've been doing in the last 12 years. So this is a bit the summary of the expedition. So 2012, this is when I started here at ETH Zurich as a postdoc. And then, so depending on the funding that I got, we could go to more or less expeditions. So you see here, probably you see that the big funding came after 2019, where we could go to more and more expeditions. Some of them, we only get samples from these expeditions. In other cases, we go ourselves and we collect the samples ourselves. So it's been more than 40 expeditions that we did in these 12 years. So we had to bring, in general, I did a very rough calculations, but about 25,000 liters of seawater that we bring back to Zurich that we need to analyze. So as you can understand, one of our big challenges is sending material and getting the material back. So in this case, the Swiss Polar Institute has been a wonderful institution that they gave us this logistic support, giving money to send boxes in and out, and also to send people to this expedition. So you see, we make use of these SBB boxes. They are robust, they are really good. You can make it as tall as us or even taller. And then we send these boxes, usually they are empty and they have bottles or folded cubitainers, and they come back full of water. So it's not only volume that we send, it's also actually they come back quite heavy. So this, as Basil was telling, it actually needs a lot of logistic, but also this financial support to actually be sending these big boxes in and out. Our big friend in the last year has been Schenker. It's been one institution, one of these shipping companies that really understood what we were doing, because in the end, when you send these big boxes, usually at customs, they stop it and they think it's for a commercial value. So we really had to find someone that would deal through these challenges in saying, okay, what we send, it doesn't actually have any commercial value. It has a big scientific value, but we won't need to pay 2,000 Swiss francs of customs, because that's actually not the purpose. So then the question is, why actually are we placed in Zurich if we have all these logistics in and out and send these boxes and water and almost filling the entire Zurich lake almost? But the big reason is summarized in this slide. This slide is a world map that shows where these machines are located. These are called accelerator mass spectrometers. These are very specific machines that they measure this kind of radioactivity that we're looking at in the ocean. And you see that one of the places where the density of these accelerator mass spectrometers is higher is actually Zurich. So we're not placed close to the ocean, but we're placed close to the machines that we need to analyze our samples. Therefore, because the ocean is not next door, we need to go to the ocean. And for this, we really had to build up on this big network of who can provide us this infrastructural support to access the ocean and get samples. And this is a bit with all the institutions that we collaborate. You can imagine that if we go to the Arctic and to the North Atlantic, we need to collaborate with institutions that they're actually located close to these oceans. So Canada is our big partner. We collaborate with Bedford Institute of Oceanography, Institut Nordique du Québec, the fisheries. We collaborate with Iceland because we also need to get samples from outflow regions in the ocean that they are close to this area. We collaborate a lot with Germany, especially with the Alfred Wegener Institute, as you saw in the first picture. So we have access to the Polarstern, and then Woodsole Oceanographic Institution, clearly the Bermuda Institute of Oceans, and et cetera, et cetera. So we've kind of built up all this network with the institutions that have provided us what we actually don't have in Switzerland, and we had to find it elsewhere. So how was this network built? I had to think a bit because I don't know how I did it, but I think these are a few points, but I'm happy to hear others, and maybe we can include this in the discussion afterwards. For me, an important aspect is time. You don't make collaborations from one day to the next. You make collaborations with time, and this already starts at your PhD, at your postdoc positions. Just start talking to people, meeting people, and kind of this is building relationships, like a friend relationship or, you know, a partner relationship. You probably need also social skills, but not necessarily. In my case, this worked. I'm kind of an extrovert person, so this helped me a lot on talking to people. And maybe you go to a conference and then you go and have dinner together and go for a beer, and these kind of things also help a lot in building up networks. But not everyone is extrovert, and this doesn't mean that you won't be building a network if you're not an extrovert. I think another thing that it's actually quite important is having technical skills. So maybe you might not be the one going for a beer and exchanging ideas, but you might be a person that's very good in the lab, or very good at helping out in the field, or very good at using the screwdriver and helping others. And this can be as valuable as having actually social skills. I think also as PhDs and postdocs, what's very good is that you start with pre-established networks. It's good that you use the networks that your supervisors have, your colleagues have, the postdoc next door has, and then you start pulling this string. I think it's good that you go to meetings and you make sure that you've been introduced to the right people. You go to conferences and you are also introduced to the colleagues of your supervisor. It might end up into a collaboration or not, but at least it's a starting point. And then for me, I think it's also very important to create opportunities. I think it's not only about doing your PhD or your project, it's about being open to other opportunities that might arise. I'll put an example afterwards, but I mean, these opportunities sometimes can also lead to new collaborations and meeting people that you wouldn't have expected otherwise. Where to start? I think conferences is a really good place, going to meetings, being involved in institutional responsibilities, chairing sessions in conferences, helping out in being the PhD representative of your department or the postdoc representative of your department, mentoring. So all this that goes a bit beyond science, this helps a lot in building networks, I think. I'm going to talk about 3 experiences that in my case, these were game changers. I mean, for you might be others, but just to put 3 examples. The first one was in 2008. I was doing my PhD. I was in the 2nd year. My PhD was about chickens and the radioactive accumulation into the different organs, so nothing to do with oceans, right? But next door, there was this other PhD that was working in oceans, also looking at radioactivity, but not in chickens, but in oceans. And they needed someone to help her in one of the expeditions in the Southern Ocean. So this, of course, I thought this would be a great chance for me. So there I am. That's a few years ago. I'm here. And of course, this was putting aside my PhD for 3 months, was going to the ocean and doing something completely different. But this allowed me to already get in contact with the geotraces community, that actually now I do have an ERC consolidator. In the panel of this ERC consolidator, there was one person from geotraces that I actually met in this expedition. And whether the proposal make it through because of this person or not, I don't know. But this also somehow always helps when people know you and they know what you do and how you work. Another game changer for me is I finished my PhD again with radioactivity and chickens. But when I finished the PhD, this was February 2011, the Fukushima accident happened, and they needed someone to go to collect waters and analyze them, same radionuclides as the ones I was looking at chickens. And therefore, I was a very skilled person in the lab. I had published a couple of papers on how to develop new techniques and optimize techniques to analyze these radionuclides. And I was called not because I was an expert in the ocean, but because I was technically skilled on something that was interesting for this project. So you see here, that was like a connection that was not obvious, but also helped me a lot. And the third one, this was, so that's in the North Pole 2015. There was also this expedition going to the Arctic Ocean. One person declined to go because had other things to finish and do. And then there was suddenly this opportunity to join this expedition. I didn't have anything ready by this time, so I had to organize everything. Everything was in a hurry. It kind of didn't feel that, but I just didn't hesitate and prepared everything, went to this expedition. And thanks to the samples that I collected there, I built up on the project that I'm doing today. So this was really also another game changer. When I think about local versus international use, you've seen that maybe I've been talking a lot about international networking, but maybe one tip that I would say, and Basil already also mentioned it before, it's good that you start connecting here. You start connecting home. You start collaborating with people that they are next door. It's much easier to take a bicycle and go to University of Zurich to collaborate than taking a flight and going to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Boston, right? So try to make use of all the connections and collaborations you can do on site, and then start expanding as things are not available here in Zurich or wherever you are, right? So this, I would say, this is important. Of course, then the international collaborations, or the ones in Europe, are necessary, especially to exchange, to meet other people, to have the experience in another lab, and to use other infrastructures that here doesn't exist. So don't take me wrong. I would say these are important, but always better if you can do things locally and try to solve problems next door instead of other side of the world. So Ollie asked me what I wished I had known. I don't know. I think I would say, and I always give the same advice for me, I would say be yourself, and the collaborations also need to be something very natural and spontaneous, right? So there are people that you connect with, and that's going to be a good collaboration. And people that you have to force it too much to collaborate, just don't do it. That's not going to work. So maybe that's the only thing that with time, I think, oh, maybe you want to collaborate with the one that's the best in, and then this person is actually, you know, busy with other things. It's not going to be helpful. You're not going to learn. You're going to feel frustrated. So maybe that's the only tip. But I'm more interested in actually what you want to know. And if there's anything you think I can answer, I will try. But otherwise, it can also be maybe answers are within this room. Okay, thank you.
And thank you, Núria, for your presentation. Yes, please. Now leave the floor to Dr. Mike Styllas.
Okay, hi everybody, and thanks for the invitation. My name is Mike Styllas, and I'm from Greece, and I'm a climber and I'm a researcher. I work now on tropical islands. I live in Paris and I work in the Institut de Physique de Globe de Paris for the time being. But before, I was 4 years involved in a big global project in EPFL. And even before that, all my life has been centered around mountains. So I will start a little bit with the mountains because changing from a mountain guide and an alpinist to an expedition leader, it was a big change for me, something what Núria said about her own milestones in her career. So let's start from the beginning. 20 years ago, when I turned back to take this photo just a little below the summit of Mount Everest, I was sure that everything will be fine. It was the first Greek expedition, so it was a little bit of important for us. It was a year of the Olympics. And I had everybody was so well prepared just because the year before on our training expedition, don't get scared, everything went wrong. So we lost a friend, I got frostbitten, I was carried out of the mountain in a very bad situation. And when things went wrong, then the next time things should not go wrong. Anyway, as a Greek, I grew up in North Greece in Thessaloniki. So, you know, maybe most of you know Greece because of the nice beaches and the sea, but I grew up below Mount Olympus, which is also for me my laboratory where I do most of my research still. And from an early age, I was exposed to the high cliffs of the Olympus. Then I moved to the Alps like everybody. I had big dreams to conquer the biggest peaks of the mountain, of the world. Some of them worked out, some of them never worked out. So I went many times to the Himalayas. After Everest, I was organizing my own expedition in more remote peaks, in less popular peaks. And uncertainty at that stage was a thing that I loved. I've loved things to be uncertain, unlike later on with the scientific expeditions. Because uncertainty brings some risk, and then you don't anticipate too much, but you don't really care, and that's how you think you achieve many things. But there was always a payback time, and when you don't take into account many sequential factors, you turn back to the hospital at the best. So along this course, I was always doing my research. As I said, I'm a geologist, so I started working in the glaciers and paleoclimate of Mount Olympus. At that time, after 10 years ago, I did my first postdoc in Aix-en-Provence, Serres. So I was happy enough to date the first glaciers in the Balkan, in Greece actually, and to find permafrost and do all these cool things. So I was really connected to the cryosphere. And at that stage, I joined the EPFL as a researcher and as expedition leader for a very ambitious project. So the project is still going, and it's called Vanishing Glaciers. And what Basil said and Núria before, the network was there, or the network, the international, had to be established. But we did our training with the SPI, the team. I was part with Tom Batan, the professor, that we selected the team members that will join me in the fieldwork for 4 years. So most of what has been said from the previous talkers was already in place. There was financing, the funding was secured, and the challenges were ahead. So the project is a microbiology project. So just, I'm not gonna show the figures, but in its expedition, we had to bring liquid nitrogen up to 6,000 meters. The logistics were very heavy. We used another company for cargo, but because we were dealing with genetic material, the problem, the bigger challenge was to export the samples from different countries, out of the 14 countries that we went. So that's where the real challenge started. And then you realize that it's not a climbing expedition, it's a serious expedition that the team has to come back in one piece. And the samples have to come back in a deep frozen state for what is about to happen in the lab. So these were the places that we visited. We managed to sample 170 glaciers around the world. We saw some amazing landscapes. There were, of course, other challenges. We saw some beautiful mountains. We woke up in the middle of the summer with 1.5 meters of snow in Kyrgyzstan. We saw, in general, as I said before, 100, and we went in the glaciers to sample microbes, to sample sediment, to take water samples, to put them in the liquid nitrogen dewars that we were carrying in our bags. Or sometimes when we had external help in the Himalayas, we had Sherpas with us. And that's after you secure the funding and after everything is aligned, that's how you start a project like this, to me. So, okay, there was a selection of the glaciers. That's always tricky. When you don't know an area really well, you are counting on local collaborators. Then it's the logistics, the liquid nitrogen, the deep freezers. That was another challenge. In every country we went, we had to find deep freezers to secure the samples. So be it in the Himalayas, in Nepal, in Kyrgyzstan, we have to find even in a hospital some deep freezers because we cannot keep the samples for 2.5 months in a liquid nitrogen dewar because we had to reuse it. So the logistics were complicated. Plus you had to carry all that stuff in the back. Plus you were working in 5,000 meters of altitude. So the local information, I will never forget, it was the first expedition in New Zealand. This is one of the most iconic glaciologist of the Southern Hemisphere, Trevor Chin. He passed away just before we arrived there. But when I was asking me, okay, our last glacier, how are we gonna approach? And I will never forget, we're gonna walk to the H Glacier and look for a couple of others to conclude our sampling marathon. It was my first expedition. So our local collaborator, who was a legend and worked a lot in Antarctica, he says, this is fine, and there you made have a great expedition. This glacier took 1.5 hours to go with helicopter. So if we're about to approach on foot, as we were planning in the beginning, we'd still be walking towards that glacier. So the local knowledge is needed. You need the local collaborators, but sometimes when it has to do with more extreme settings, like alpine glaciers, Google Earth will not tell you the truth, but sometimes neither the local collaborators. So you have always the level of uncertainty. You have to secure a plan B and a plan C. Okay, if this glacier doesn't work, we have 3 other candidates. And this became the norm after the first expedition. Then the logistics. I was so happy to send liquid nitrogen from Aalborg in Denmark to Greenland. And then with big viewers, so because we want to use it for 1 month, and then everything went wrong because the ship was delayed, the liquid nitrogen evaporated, and by the time we received this big tanking nuke, there was nothing in there. We opened this, it made bloop, and that was it. And then the second expedition, what we do now? Panic on board. Do you have a plan B? Yes, no, yes, we'll see, we'll improvise. And call in Lausanne? No, don't call in Lausanne yet. Let's find a solution among the team. So anyway, solution was found, but it was not planned. So improvising when you're in the Arctic or the Antarctic or in the high mountains is not a good thing to do because it brings stress to the team, it brings stress to everybody, and of course it costs. In any case, we got dry ice from Aalborg again, and things worked well. So trip after trip, expedition, the experience was building. I have my little red Bible, I used to call it, is no offense for any religion, but it's my logbook of all the expeditions. So every time before we go, I would look, and then I would talk with the team, what went right, what went wrong. It's very important to communicate in the field when you're in remote settings with your colleagues. Maybe somebody is sick, maybe the satellite phone doesn't work. So it's always to keep all the communication open. Equally important is to get the research permits, and that was another really struggle because we were dealing with genetic material, the Nagoya Convention. From country to country, it can be so difficult and so different to get the research permits to go sample in the field. Then the fun stuff is when you have to export samples that contain genetic material. Greenland, New Zealand, in general, the so-called Western world was easy, but what about the Latin countries? What about the former Soviet countries? That there was a struggle, but as the experience was building up, there was a plan B and a plan C. In Moscow, we had to leave the samples in the deep freezers for 2.5 months. So after, with the help of the Swiss embassy, I went back to get them when we had clearance to get the samples out because they had to do so many meetings for our samples. So it was just sediment. So plan A, it works sometimes. Plan B, you need it all the time, and sometimes you need plan C. Plan C usually has to do with the health of the team, the mentality, how well is everybody doing, because you know when you're for 1 month out and you're with the same guys, 4 or 5 guys, the same all every day together, and you have a routinely process, this builds up and it can wear many people down. And people that you don't know, you met them 1 year ago, and the harder the situation gets, the more plan C and D you need, and not only to manage the equipment and the project itself, but also the team. Without the team, there is no. So sometimes things fly, and sometimes, like in Nepal, we were all happy. We had done a very long mission in very high altitude, and then when we were still sampling below Mount Everest base camp, things came that the COVID broke down again, so we had to get stranded in Kathmandu. And then it was a really critical moment because nobody else wanted to work. I mean, but to go in town and be confined, what you do? So we kind of finished our sampling project and we went down. And again, there was a little bit of push from the Swiss embassy. So things moved after a month. We spent 1 month confined in Kathmandu. It was interesting. So in resume, this is what, to me, if I put it in 5, 6 bullets, what all these 14 expeditions around the world looked like. Nothing to do with my previous life as a mountain climber, but always have to look, always have to think that the things will go wrong. And when they're right, you have to think again that it's too good to be true. Something will go wrong now. So the last 3 expeditions actually were very, very fine in Chile, in Alaska, and even in Uganda. Things went fine. And this is an email I very clearly remember from the Swiss embassy ambassadors. He was very nice. In Ecuador, we had a problem there because we didn't know that we were up on the mountains, so we didn't know that COVID had started. We had problem with the customs because they kept all the gloves, the masks, and the syringes, because they thought we were doing smuggling. We were smuggling, but it was already the case because I guess they needed them or somebody from the customs going to sell them in the black market. So we took the cargo out after a while, and we could not find gloves in Quito. So where are the gloves? Where are the masks? That we had a lot to deal with them. Anyway, the cargo, we got half of it in, the other, but the Swiss embassy was very helpful to export the samples because when we left, it was already, Europe was already in confinement. So by the time we flew in Madrid, it was, everything was, were the last flight, I think, that came from Ecuador. And yes, to get the samples out of the field is one thing. Get them back to the country into the lab to check if everything is okay, if there is a bubble that it shouldn't be is the other thing. And then to get them back and start the cool stuff, the lab work, the data processing is the final step of a project like this. So it feels more complete than just climbing a mountain now that as we talk. And after concluding my last expedition in Alaska, just to give you a little bit more, if I don't deviate the time too much, I went back to my lovely Mount Olympus, that there was a nice cave there, and I had a brilliant idea after doing so many expeditions in my home mountain with a filming crew, with everything in place, like with the mules, with no problem with logistics, with permits, to do, I was so relaxed that I thought everything is gonna flow like it flowed with the Vanishing Glaciers project. That's the ice core that we managed to get. So we're supposed to get a 25-meter ice core, and because everything went wrong again, because there was no anticipation, there was no uncertainty, because you're in your house. It's like making a coffee every morning, but everything went wrong there. Plus this year that we went back, we lost 4 meters of ice. So now that's my task as I live here, to go back to Greece with this project, to go sample the ice cave and a few alpine lakes, and go back to Everest next year for a new project that has to do with the sustainability of Mount Everest and the natural hazards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike, for the presentation. And then we can go to the next presentation, if you don't mind. Thank you.
So, hello, everyone. Well, I will not present any of such exciting pictures and videos, unfortunately. What we are presenting to you, my colleague and I, are actually practical information regarding transport, and one of the topics also is export control. Maybe you heard about that regulation. So we're talking about regulation now. And so I was asked by the team that I will give you, or that my colleague and I are giving to you, some tips regarding planning, or for the planning of a successful field campaign, especially regarding preparation of transport. So I think that's most important, because we are involved in those preparations when colleagues and researchers are preparing in ETH those campaigns. And I would go that way. So that's the overview of the presentation. I will show you some, give some information about us, and then I will deepen the topic of export control, something that everyone should actually think of before anything is delivered. And then the preparing of shipment. That's after export control has been performed. So some words about us, the two of us. So my name is Silvia Nast. I'm the head of export services and I'm the export control officer of ETH Zurich. And here you can see what my job is, what I'm responsible for. And my colleague, Gaganpreet Singh, he's the expert what forwarding agent activities concerns. So he's a trained specialist and foreign trade specialist as well. So we have it, well, we both do both, actually, both topics. But my special area is export control. And I will tell you now more about that topic. This is my part. Then I will hand over to my colleague and he will tell you more about preparing the shipment. So export control, I'll make a short introduction. So what is export control? Export control is actually something which is based on these treaties. It's all about dual use. Dual use means you can use equipment not just for the civilian area, but also for the military field. So what we have in ETH is that we have a lot of equipment that will be brought to campaigns outside of Switzerland. They are exported and we have the legal obligation. This is a regulation given by law that we have to check first if we are allowed to deliver those items abroad without having an export license. And this export license is given by the authorities. So that's something that we have got to think of first before we organize the transport. And this can take a bit of time. This is why you should always take a bit of extra time to prepare all that. So now export control is, as I said, based on all those regulations and has got to do with armament. We want, or the states that are or have signed those treaties would like to regulate the equipment being sent abroad, that they have got the control over those equipment that are leaving the country, that they are not misused for military activities. And this is why this is important to think of, because otherwise criminal consequences will be actually the result. So Switzerland signed all the 3 treaties. As you can see, the years there. This is when it came into force. And we have the 4 regimes. We are member of all the 4. Was Switzerland is member, not ETH. Switzerland as a country is member of those regimes. And Switzerland signed all of them, as many other countries did, like the United States and almost all European countries did that. And the most important one is the Wassenaar Arrangement. That's where you can find all those information. So export control, as it says here, is yes, all the items where we are not, well, you are more rather confronted with the material products being exported, but you also have software and technology. You have to take care that if there are any export controlled topics or items that you would like to take with you, that you have got a license if it's necessary before you leave the country. The questions that in export control is most important are those here mentioned. So that means when you have items or products, equipment you take with you, you need to know where they come from. What origin do they have? And for a transport, it's important that you have got information collected from the suppliers where you have them purchased. The supplier need to tell you if they are export controlled or not. They have got to give you the information. Because these items, as soon as they have been identified to be dual use items, they have a certain number. They are identified as such. And if you have an equipment that is export controlled and you have, well, it's the what, the equipment, what shall be exported, then you need to know where do you want to go. So it is the country where you are actually targeting. If you go to South America, what country are you targeting? Where do you want to go and export the items from Switzerland? Then you have got the well, you will never, because when you are, especially equipment, they will be kept in your property, that you're not transferring it to anyone. This will be kept with you, it's yours. Most of the campaigns you have temporary export. So that means it's your item, you take it back again to your institute, and I mean, the who will receive it is you. You will keep it. I mean, this is no issue then. And what is it for? It's for the campaign, it's for collecting or for measuring items abroad. But you will be the party that is in possession of this equipment. It is not someone else, like you are selling it to a party and that party will keep it and then you go out of the country again without this equipment. Most of the time it's you have got this equipment in hand, you keep it, you use it, and you take it back to Switzerland. So what you have got to think of is just where does it go? And if it goes to a country, well, if it goes abroad and it is an export controlled item, you need an export license from the Swiss authority. That's the so-called export permit. And this is for the item, like a spectrometer or a camera or whatever. But you need to know prior, before you are asking for such a license, is it subject to export control? If it's not, you are free. You don't need that license. But if it is, you have to ask for it. So now in ETH, we are the team organizing for our researchers those licenses. And ETH Zurich has also a general license. That means certain countries are already covered. You do not have got to ask for an extra license at the authorities in Switzerland. There's no need for that. One remark I would like to make is, as soon as you have, and this is why that where does it come from? It is the manufacturing party that is making is producing the item. As soon as it has an origin in the United States, we have the obligation also to take care of that regulation, because the United States have got extraterritorial applicability what their export control regulation concern. So that means if we have an item that is export controlled and it has an origin in the United States, we may need, depending on the country, we may need even an export license from the United States authority, that we are allowed to export the item to the country where we'd like to go to with that item or that equipment. For instance, what most of critical countries are the so-called country E group, and these are Iran, Syria. You have North Korea. I don't think any would go to North Korea, but this is also one of the countries, and Cuba. So if you have got items that are United originated, well, they are there produced, have got the US origin, and you would like to go to Iran or you would like to go to Cuba, you may not be allowed to with that equipment. Because the United States, they have got the presumption of denial what the export control permit concerns. So you have got to take a different one, not one of the United States origin, take some of the European Union or wherever. China, for instance, also fine, but never then use United States. That's something that I can just give to you as a recommendation. United States equipment may be tough when you go to certain countries, that you're not allowed to export it to those countries. So that's the regulation as an overview. What we have, these are the legal regulations we have got to take care. Well, in Switzerland, this is the main part that we have to consider, because in Switzerland, this is where we export the equipment, the whole campaign material. That's what we have got to take care. And what I just mentioned is the United States. That's what we have to take care. The European Union is actually not that to consider what export from Switzerland concerns. But what we have to take care also is when you are in a European country where you make your research and you have an export controlled item that you are exporting from Switzerland, you have got to make sure that you are allowed to export it from that country where you are, again, back to Switzerland. So you need an export license there as well. And this is can maybe challenging because it takes months until you get it. And to avoid export control topics or issues, you should actually go for non-export controlled items when you go abroad. That's the best advice. Then you have no trouble what the export control license is concerned. But before you know, if you have an equipment that is subject to export control, you need to know if it is, you know. That's why you go and have to go back to the suppliers. And if you have an equipment made by yourself, your team has made it by themselves, you have to make the self-assessment based on the goods control list made available by the authorities. That's then your job. That's here. The classification. That's most important. Without this classification, you have no idea if export control applies or not. But that's a legal regulation and it needs to be taken care of before any organization of transport is being made. And here the goods of origin. Yes, that's about export control. Have you got any questions? Was it confusing? I guess so. It is not an easy topic, honestly. Okay, then I would like to hand over to my colleague, then, because he takes that part, shipment.
So, hello everyone. I understood that you are exporting a lot of material on a temporary base. So I will give you some information about the Carneata, a second temporary customs procedure, and finally about documents you need for shipping to foreign countries. So first of all, the Carneata, the primarily intended use is for professional equipment. So such as you guys are taking equipment with yourself on field trips, research material or expeditions, but also for fairs and exhibitions or commercial samples. There are two main conditions which must be met. The first one is that delivery on the basis of Carneata requires own use of material. So you cannot lend out material or borrow it to someone else, to a third party. I know in practice many people or companies do it like this, but actually it's not allowed. And the second one is that it must be re-imported in unchanged conditions, so you cannot make any modifications or processing on that material. So it must be re-imported in the same condition as it left Switzerland. The next point, currently we have 78 countries which are part or which have signed the ATA convention. The latest addition is Peru, which was added as of 1st May. And later this year, we will also have Saudi Arabia and the Philippines. So at the end of the year, we will have 80 countries in total. Currently, there are 78, and you can see or find the list of countries at ataswiss.ch. Generally, the Carneata is valid for 1 year, and there is no possibility to extend the Carneata. So an extension is not possible, but you can apply for a replacement carnet. But only if the foreign customs authorities accept a replacement carnet. So we have many countries which do not accept replacements, such as Mexico, Singapore, and many others. So make sure that you clarify before you are leaving Switzerland if the destination country is accepting a replacement carnet, if you are intending to stay there for more than 1 year. About the cost, there is usually charged a base fee between 90 and 130 francs, depending on whether you are a member of the Chamber of Commerce or not. And plus, they will also charge 1 per mil of the value of the goods. So, and there is something else. You also have to pay 20% of the value of the goods as a deposit, which you will get back when you are re-importing the goods and you return the carneata to the Chamber of Commerce. We do not recommend to use the carneata for a goods value of up to 500 francs, obviously because the cost of the carneata is almost the same if you're re-importing the goods on a regular base. So up to 500 francs, carneata is probably not the best solution. And also make sure that you know the deadline or the period of re-exportation of the country of destination. Because we have some countries, again, such as Singapore, which have a shorter period for re-exportation. They have 6 months instead of 1 year. And just make sure you have the information on hand before leaving Switzerland. Otherwise, you will have to pay the import fees if you are re-importing the goods after 1 year or after 6 months. Exactly. Where can you order the carneata? Basically on this platform. That's www.ataswiss.ch. All 17 chambers of commerce in Switzerland are connected to this platform. And you need a one-time pre-registration, which allows you to order as many carneatas as you want. And on the 4th tab, country list, you can see, which is marked with that red circle. This is where you can find a list of the countries which are part of the ATA convention. Also important, get your carneata stamped by customs each time you cross the border. So if you are shipping the goods with a forwarding agent, they will make sure that the carnet will be stamped. If you are carrying the goods with yourself, just make sure that each time you cross the border, get a stamp on it. For example, if you're going to Germany, a one-time trip, you should have at the end 4 stamps, 1 for the exportation out of Switzerland, 1 for the importation in Germany, then the re-exportation out of Germany and the re-importation in Switzerland. And the carneata must be returned to the Chamber of Commerce before it expires. So the date on the carneata is the expiry date. That's the latest date or the latest day the carneata should arrive at the Chamber of Commerce. So not the post stamp, but it should arrive on that day. Another option you have is the ZFAV, the so-called Customs Declaration for Temporary Admission. We recommend to use this procedure only with a forwarding agent or a customs service provider. The reason is that it's quite complicated to fill out this or to clear the paperwork related to this customs declaration. And important note is that the ZFAV, or the Customs Declaration for Temporary Admission, is only a Swiss customs procedure. So it has no influence on the customs formalities abroad. And that's why you should clarify before you leave if the same or a similar customs procedure is available in the country of destination. Unlike the carneata, we have 2 years of validity after the date of issuance, and you can extend the ZFAV up to 3 times by 1 year each. And you have the same condition. You must re-import the goods in an unchanged condition, so no modifications allowed here as well. The customs clearance charges, they vary a lot, and they depend on the service provider you use. So it probably makes sense to get more than one offer. Usually you pay between 100 and 150 francs per transaction. And here we do not recommend for a goods value up to 1,000 francs because the import fees in Switzerland, 8.1% of VAT. So yeah, I think that's self-explanatory. And one difference, the ZFAV can only be carried out during the business hours. Unlike the Carneata could be used also on weekends if the customs point is staffed. So if any customs officer is at the customs or at the border, you can use the Carneata, but not the ZFAV. They can be only carried out during the business hours. If you have something which is not being shipped with a Carneata, you will have to fill out the proforma invoice. Also with the ZFAV, you will need a proforma invoice alongside the customs form. This is a template we use at the ETH. It contains actually all necessary information you require for the customs declaration, such as the export control number, if necessary, if you have dual-use products, the country of origin, also the customs code, which is the tariff code or HS code, the Incoterms, and of course, the realistic value of the goods. So the customs authorities, they say that the realistic value is a value which you would charge to an independent third party. So if you are not sure what value you should use, maybe the material value, the market value, or just a value you would ask for if you would sell the device or the material to anyone else. So that's just for help. About the customs code, what is the customs code? It's actually a standardized system of numbers to classify goods in international trade. It was developed and is maintained by the World Customs Organization, and in Switzerland we have always 8-digit numbers. So the HS code is always 8 digits, of which the first 6 digits are internationally harmonized. So it means that in Germany, US, Canada, or wherever, you have always the same 6 digits for the same product. If you don't have the HS code of your device, or if it's not known, you can either ask the supplier, which is recommended, or if you have any self-built or self-developed device, you can look it up in TARES. TARES is the data bank of the Swiss customs authorities, where you can look up the either by entering the code or search by text. So you have 2 options. For in this example, you can see if you put thermometers in the search text, you will find you will get this result from the data bank. And last but not least, the Incoterms, the terms of delivery. They are actually, or they define which party is responsible or bears the transportation costs, and which party takes the risk in case of any damage or loss. So for example, if you agree X works, EXW, you can see that the seller is only responsible to make sure that the goods are made ready for shipment, and everything else is a responsibility of the buyer, of the consignee. So we recommend to always, if you're sending goods to a third party, always agree and include the Incoterms in your contract or on the shipping documents.
Yes, I think there is another lecturer coming in this room in some minutes. So I would really like to thank everyone that is here in the room for making this happen. Sorry. Come on. Yeah. And of course, I invite you also for the aperitif that is served in the corridor. And thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.